The village lay cradled between rolling hills that were dry and cracked, yet stubbornly green in patches where life refused to let go. Dust rose from the narrow paths like ghosts of footsteps long gone. The houses, once made of straw and clay, now bore corrugated metal roofs that gleamed too sharply in the sun. Wires stretched across the sky, humming faintly, cutting through the endless blue, bringing the outside world close but cold. The rhythms of the past seemed to whisper in the wind, but few paused to listen. At the center of this village stood a small, weathered shelter, leaning slightly as though bowed by centuries of memory. Inside, the old ceremonial drum rested on its stand. Its surface was cracked and worn, stretched thin from years of silence. Dust clung to it, soft and gray, as if the world itself had chosen to ignore it. Yet, even in stillness, it radiated an undeniable presence. To those who remembered, it was more than wood and skin, it was the heartbeat of the ancestors, a keeper of their stories, joys, and sorrows. Its silent voice carried wisdom older than any building in the village, older than any living soul. The elders approached it with reverence. Their hands were lined and knotted with age, their eyes soft but heavy with expectation. They spoke little, but every glance they cast toward the drum was full of memory. Some touched it gently, fingers brushing across cracks that had carried the weight of generations. To them the drum was sacred. Its absence from daily life did not lessen its power. It was alive, waiting, patient. Yet not all in the village felt the drum's gravity. A young man passed the shelter that afternoon, walking with purpose, shoulders straight, eyes scanning the horizon beyond the hills. He was tall, restless, and sharp in ways that made him impatient with the small rhythms of village life. His hair fell into his eyes, unkempt, defying tradition in every fold. He carried with him the weight of ambition and a quiet resentment that had grown slowly, like a vine creeping around a stone. Tradition, he felt, was a chain. The drum, he thought, was the heaviest link. He paused, noticing the elders gathered around the shelter. They worked slowly, carefully, sweeping the floor, dusting the drum, preparing for the ancestral festival. The festival that once defined the village, that once breathed life into every path and shadow, now felt thin, almost forgotten. The young man saw only the cracks in the drum, the dust that softened its edges, and the wrinkles on the elders' hands. He felt the pulse of pride and fear inside him twist into defiance. A laugh escaped him before he could stop it. It was sharp, sudden, and bright against the quiet. A sound that cut through years of silence, carrying both mockery and disbelief. Some of the younger villagers, unsure at first, hesitated, then allowed themselves a nervous smile. The elders froze, hands still, hearts tightening. The laughter hit like a stone thrown into a still pond, rippling through the collective memory of the village. The young man felt a thrill of liberation. He told himself the drum was nothing more than wood, old and brittle. He told himself the village's devotion was backward, a trap. The elder's eyes burned with a silent weight that he refused to meet. His laughter became armor, and with it, he turned his back and walked away, the dust from the path rising in his wake. Yet beneath that laughter lay something he could not escape. A flicker of shame, hidden beneath pride, whispered to him as he left the shelter. He did not want to hear it, did not want to name it. It was easier to push it down, to mock what he could not understand. That night the village lay quiet. The wind moved like water over the hills, carrying faint scents of earth and smoke. Inside the small shelter, the drum seemed to hum faintly, though no one touched it. Its silence was not empty, it was waiting. Waiting for hands that might honor it, for hearts that might remember. The elders spoke in low tones, careful not to disturb the evening air. They did not shout. They did not scold. Their disappointment was heavier than anger. It settled in the spaces between words, in the lines of their faces, in the rhythm of their breaths. They had seen the laughter of youth before, but this time it felt different. It was not mere rebellion, it was a refusal, a choice to turn away. And the festival approached. Once it had been the most sacred night of the year. Every family, every child, every elder knew their place in the dance, in the firelight, in the rhythm of the drum. It was a night when stories came alive, when the past and present met in a single heartbeat. But now faith had thinned like morning mist. Fewer hands helped with preparation. Fewer voices sang the old songs. The drum waited, patient and silent, its cracks and dust more pronounced in the fading light. The young man felt a tug toward the festival, a pull he did not understand. Something in the drum reached for him, beyond his pride, beyond his anger. But he pushed it aside. He was not yet ready. The world outside the hills called to him with promises of freedom and motion. The drum and its memory were bound to a past he was eager to leave behind. And still the drum waited. Its silence was not empty, it was heavy with stories, with expectation, with a presence that would not be ignored. The village slept under a sky littered with stars, unaware that the rhythm of the old drum had not forgotten him. The young man's home sat at the edge of the village, near the fields where tall grasses swayed even in the faintest wind. The house itself was simple, wooden beams darkened by age, walls scarred by years of sun and rain. But it was not the house that held weight in his heart. It was the memory of his father. His father had been the drum's guardian, not just caretaker but listener. He had touched the drum with reverence, speaking in whispers to it as if it could hear beyond wood and skin. He had guided every festival, every rhythm, every moment when the village's past reached forward to meet the present. And when he died, the duty was not lifted, it passed silently, inexorably to his son. The young man did not accept it. Grief had lodged inside him, heavy and bitter. It was never voiced, never named. Instead, it became anger, anger disguised as disdain, contempt for what he could not control. Every mention of the drum, every reference to the festival, twisted that anger tighter. The elders' eyes weighed on him, not with accusation but with expectation. Their silent hope pressed on him like a physical weight, a chain he could not remove. Tradition was not comfort. It was confinement. At night the village grew strange. The wind shifted unpredictably, rustling leaves in patterns that felt deliberate, almost watchful. Shadows moved where no tree or building should cast them. From the shelter where the drum rested, faint vibrations traveled through the air. It was subtle at first, a pulse beneath the floorboards, a low hum that faded when he approached. He told himself it was the wind or his imagination. He told himself that the drum was still nothing but wood. But a part of him could not ignore the feeling that something was listening, or waiting. Dreams followed him to sleep. Faces appeared that he did not recognize, yet felt familiar. Eyes that belonged to people long dead seemed to study him, patient, expectant. The drum came to him in these dreams, not silent but insistent, urging him to remember. Sometimes he woke with his heart pounding, drenched in sweat, unable to shake the sensation of being watched. He tried to turn away to ignore it. But the memory of his father, gentle, patient, unyielding, haunted every quiet moment. The festival drew nearer, and with it, the tension in the village grew. Elders spoke in careful tones, their voices soft but firm. They reminded him of lineage, of duty, of the covenant between his family and the drum. He heard their words, but he did not hear their meaning. To him, every request was a chain. Every reminder was a trap. And so he pulled further away. Publicly he mocked preparations. He derided the ritual. Each act widened the distance between him and the community, deepening the isolation that already thrummed in his chest. Yet inside, a conflict gnawed quietly. The drum was not merely wood. It had been entrusted to his bloodline as a living covenant. Every crack, every scar, every whisper of vibration carried the weight of generations. And somewhere deep inside he felt the tug of that responsibility. The part of him that remembered sitting beside his father, listening to the low, steady thrum of the drum, stirred uneasily. It whispered that there was more at stake than pride or freedom, that neglect had consequences he could not yet see. He ignored it. He kept walking past the shelter, head high, laughter forced when others looked too closely at him. The village watched silently. Some pitied him. Some feared what might come if the drum's memory was ignored. And some, quietly, hoped he might awaken before it was too late. At night, the drum responded again. Not fully, not like during the festivals, but subtly. A vibration, a pulse, almost like a heartbeat. He felt it even in his own house, in the stillness, and the sensation was both comforting and terrifying. It reminded him that the past would not be ignored forever, that he could not escape it entirely. The elders said nothing. They only watched, knowing that the weight of inheritance was not a lesson to be given, but one to be lived. And so the young man stood at a crossroads. He wanted freedom, movement, a life unbound by the expectations of the village. Yet the drum, his father's legacy, and the gaze of ancestors yet unseen pressed silently against him. He did not know whether to laugh, run, or kneel. The tension inside him became unbearable, a storm of pride, grief, and fear that no amount of defiance could calm. The festival was days away now. Torches would soon be lit, fires built, and the village would gather. The drum would wait at the center, patient, eternal, and indifferent to his choices. He could ignore it as he had so far, or he could answer the call he had refused for too long. But even in his denial, he could not escape the sense that history itself was moving, pulling at him, and that the drum's rhythm, though silent for now, was a promise he might yet be forced to reckon with. The days before the festival felt heavier than any before. The sun rose and fell, but the air itself seemed charged, as if waiting for something that no one could see. The young man sensed it first in the way the shadows stretched too long across the dirt paths, and the way the wind carried whispers that felt almost like voices. Animals grew uneasy. Birds perched in silence, refusing their morning songs. Dogs whimpered at corners of the yard where nothing should exist. Even the trees seemed to lean closer, their roots shifting softly in the soil. At the shelter, the old drum responded. It was subtle at first, a tremor in the air, a vibration along the cracked wood, as if the drum remembered its own heartbeat. Sometimes it pulsed in rhythm with his own chest, though he was far away. Other times he thought he heard a faint hum, a sound so low and deep that it felt like it came from beneath the earth itself. He told himself it was wind or imagination, but a shiver ran down his spine each time he passed the shelter. The elders noticed too. They moved with quiet intensity around the drum, whispering words to it in voices only they could hear. Their faces were grave, and their eyes flicked often to the young man. They believed the drum was restless because of neglect. They believed that the ancestors, sensing his refusal to honor their covenant, were trying to reach him through the vessel his family had always guarded. But the young man refused to believe. He laughed again, sometimes aloud, sometimes in the private corners of his home. He told himself fear was weakness, that he would not be swayed by superstition. And yet, late at night, he awoke to dreams that would not let him rest. In those dreams, he was a child again, small and wide-eyed, sitting beside his father as the drum hummed softly beneath their hands. He could feel the warmth of his father's presence, the pulse of care in every stroke of the drum. The memory came sharp and aching, reminding him of trust and belief, of love and responsibility. He tried to flee the memory, but it clung to him, pressing against his chest with a weight he could not dismiss. One morning, villagers discovered something new at the drum shelter. The main drum, already cracked and worn, had split further along its surface. From the crack oozed a dark, slow sap, sticky and pungent, almost alive. The elders murmured in fear and wonder, telling one another that the ancestors were displeased. The young man heard of it, of course, and a small, uncomfortable sensation gnawed inside him. Yet he dismissed it outwardly with sarcasm and ridicule. "It's only old wood," he said to himself. "It cannot speak. It cannot act." Still he could not shake the unease. The wind carried faint rhythms that teased him when he walked through the village alone. Sometimes, distant and indistinct, he thought he heard footsteps behind him when no one was there. Shadows moved where they should not, and the air felt thicker near the drum shelter, almost alive, almost waiting. The ancestral festival loomed closer, and with it the pressure grew heavier. Elders prepared quietly, lighting torches, building fires, and arranging ceremonial spaces with care. They spoke little of the young man, but every movement seemed to acknowledge him indirectly. Their hope and worry hung in the air, an invisible thread connecting him to the drum and to the past he had refused to honor. For the young man, tension became unbearable. Every attempt to ignore the drum, to laugh at superstition, was met with subtle reminders of what he had inherited, and what he had neglected. His pride demanded rebellion, but his heart whispered memory. Somewhere deep inside he could feel the ancestors stirring, waiting, patient but insistent. And then came the omen. One evening as the sun dipped behind the hills, a sharp, cracking sound echoed from the drum shelter. The crack in the drum widened, running like a jagged line across its surface. Faint traces of ash seemed to rise from the split, carried on the wind like smoke from a fire that had never burned. It was as though the drum itself was breathing, bleeding, warning. The elders did not shout. They did not move hastily. They simply stared, faces pale but solemn, and whispered that the ancestors were speaking through the vessel. The young man saw it from the distance, feeling a tightening in his chest, a mix of fear and awe he could not name. His laughter felt hollow now, echoing off walls of pride that had once protected him but now only confined him. Something in the drum had shifted, and he could not ignore it. Yet he turned away. He would not answer. He would not kneel. He would not reach for what he did not understand. Pride, stubbornness, and the desire to escape still held him firmly in their grip. But the air had changed. The festival approached. The drum pulsed with life, though unplayed. The ancestors were stirring. And the young man, though unaware, was standing at the threshold of a reckoning he could no longer avoid. The wind carried a faint echo of a rhythm that no one had struck. The shadows stretched long and thin across the village paths. And the drum waited, patient, inevitable and alive. Night fell over the village like a heavy blanket, deep and thick, swallowing the hills and folding the world into shadow. Torches flickered along the paths, their flames bending in the wind as though they too were uneasy. Smoke from small fires rose into the sky, twisting and curling, carrying the scent of roasted grain and herbs. The village was quiet, but the silence was charged, vibrating with a tension that made the young man's chest tighten with unease. At the center of the village, the old drum rested in its shelter. Dust had been swept away, and the crack in its surface had been examined with care, reverence, and worry. It stood ready, upright, patient, waiting for the hands that would guide it, for the heart that might answer its silent call. Villagers gathered slowly, many hesitant, many unsure if they truly believed anymore. Children clung to parents' skirts, wide-eyed and nervous. Elders moved with careful authority, positioning themselves around the ceremonial space, checking the fires, the torches, the patterns of smoke and shadow. It was a festival in form, even if faith had thinned to a whisper. The young man remained at the edge of the gathering, separate, defiant, yet strangely aware of the drum's presence. He watched from a distance, arms crossed, jaw tight, pretending he was unmoved. Inside, however, a storm of fear, pride, and curiosity churned relentlessly. He had refused to participate in preparation, had mocked the ritual, had dismissed every warning, but now the drum's gravity pressed against him, invisible and undeniable. Then the ritual began. Fires flared higher as the first ceremonial chants rose from the elders' lips. Smaller drums were struck in rhythm, steady and careful. Smoke spiraled in the air, carrying scent and sound alike. And then, it happened. The old drum vibrated. Not from hands striking its surface. Not from tools or touch. It pulsed, faintly at first, like the heartbeat of something that had been sleeping for centuries. The sound grew deep and steady, filling the air, wrapping around the villagers as though the earth itself had begun to breathe. People gasped. Children froze. Elders' faces tightened in recognition and awe. The rhythm was older than any living memory, heavier than history itself. It was alive, responding not to human hands, but to the presence of those who had walked this land long before. The young man stepped closer, eyes wide, chest tight. His pride and fear battled within him, each pulse of the drum striking him with unrelenting clarity. Something immense, something ancient, had awakened, and he could feel it even from the edge of the ceremonial circle. Around him, the villagers moved differently now. Those who had been hesitant began swaying, some closing their eyes as if the rhythm of the drum carried them, lifted them, beyond the world they had always known. Tears fell quietly from the eyes of the elders, their hands pressed together, bodies trembling with reverence. He saw neighbors, friends, and distant relatives touched by a presence that was both gentle and terrifying. The ancestors had arrived. Not in bodies, not in voices that could be heard aloud, but in something far older. A living presence, intangible yet undeniable. Time itself seemed to bend. The air thickened. Shadows deepened and stretched, wrapping around the fires, the villagers, the drum, as though the world had paused to let this moment unfold. And yet, the young man remained outside it. No force barred him from the circle. No hand reached to push him away. He was simply excluded. The drum continued its rhythm, deeper now, responding not to him but to the lives and hearts around it. It guided the village, awakening memory, healing old scars, connecting past and present in a single pulse. He could feel the sound, but it passed through him like wind through a cracked wall, felt but never held. He wanted to step forward. He wanted to join. Every instinct in his body screamed to kneel, to lift his hands, to place himself in the circle. But pride rooted him in place. Fear of shame, of appearing weak, of admitting the truth kept him frozen. He realized then that the drum did not act out of anger. It did not seek revenge. It did not need him to respond. Its presence, its awakening was its own. The ancestors were here. The village was alive. And he was standing outside the rhythm of life that had always included him. The night deepened. Fires glowed, shadows danced, chants echoed, and the drum pulsed with inexorable power. Time felt fractured, as if moments stretched and bent, holding the young man in place while the world moved around him. And all the while he knew, deep in the pit of his chest, that the choices he had made, the laughter, the mockery, the turning away from duty and love, had led him here. To witness the impossible, to feel its power, and yet remain unseen. The drum played. The ancestors stirred. And he remained apart. The festival had begun, but he had not. The night deepened around the village, yet the drum's rhythm did not fade. It pulsed steadily, filling the air, moving through the soil, wrapping itself around every living thing in the circle. The villagers were no longer merely standing, they were alive in a way that transcended ordinary motion. Their bodies swayed in time with a rhythm older than memory. Faces glowed in firelight, eyes closed, hearts opening to something larger than themselves. Crops near the edge of the village seemed to shimmer in the torchlight, bending toward the rhythm as though awakening after a long sleep. Old wounds, both of the body and of the heart, began to soften in the invisible embrace of the ancestors. Forgotten names were remembered, whispered aloud by those who had never spoken them before. Generations long past, names carved into stone or buried in memory, returned in song and breath and movement. And yet, the young man remained at the periphery, rooted in isolation. He could feel the energy, taste it in the air, sense it pulling at him, and yet he could not step forward. Pride, fear, and shame had built walls too high for him to climb. The pulse of the drum reached him, surrounding him like a tide, but he could not touch it. The connection was there, but it was denied him, not as punishment but as consequence. The ancestors did not look for him. They did not call him by name. They did not need to. They danced without him, carried forward by the village that had remembered its roots. Their presence was not wrathful, it was indifferent. They were engaged with the faithful, with the open-hearted, with the ones willing to step into the rhythm of history. And he realized the truth in the hollow echo of his own chest. His laughter, his mockery, his rejection. They had not banished him. He had banished himself. Fear rose, sharp and cold, but it was different from before. Before, it had been distant, a story told by shadows. Now it was immediate, visceral, a weight pressing into every bone. He understood in a way he could not unlearn. The ancestors' absence was more terrifying than their anger ever could have been. Being unseen by what mattered most, being excluded from the rhythm of life itself, that was a wound that could not be healed with pride. The village moved as one in communion and reverence. Elders, adults, children, they were all lifted, connected, alive in a harmony older than stone. The fire's glow reflected in their eyes, not as light, but as the memory of light passed down through generations. The drum's pulse carried the heartbeat of ancestors through every body, every breath, every motion. He watched the hands of the villagers rise and fall in perfect, unspoken synchronization. The smoke curled upward in patterns that made the night itself seem alive. Trees shivered in the wind, casting long, dancing shadows that joined in the rhythm. Even the hills seemed to lean closer, listening. And he remained outside it all. Every moment that passed deepened the ache inside him. Regret, shame, and longing entwined into a heavy knot that no force could untangle. He wanted to be part of the dance, to feel the drum under his hands, to hear the pulse move through him. But he had turned away when the time had come. He had laughed when he should have honored. He had mocked when he should have listened. The ancestors' presence, immense and unyielding, was there, but it simply ignored him. He was invisible, not because of punishment but because the choice had already been made. They were dancing without him. And in that realization, a grief unlike any he had ever known spread through him, dark and relentless. He wanted to call out. He wanted to fall to his knees. But even the words in his throat could not bridge the distance. His soul trembled as he understood the weight of absence, the true cost of pride, and the depth of belonging lost. Around him life moved forward. The drum continued its ancient rhythm, stronger, steadier, eternal. The village was whole, alive, connected, and healing. And he was alone. Tears ran freely down his face, unheeded by the fires, the shadows, or the ancestors themselves. The isolation pressed in, suffocating and precise, a mirror of the choices he had made. His laughter had been his own undoing, and now he knew the final truth. The most profound pain comes not from being punished, but from being ignored, from being left out of what truly matters. And still the drum pulsed. The festival ended, and the village woke to a new morning, fresh and bright. Fires had burned low, shadows had retreated, and the drum's rhythm had faded, but its echo lingered in the soil, the trees, and the hearts of the villagers. Life continued, ordinary yet extraordinary, as if the world itself had shifted while he slept. The young man walked among them, but he no longer belonged. He moved through the streets like a shadow, silent, invisible to the energy that had filled the night. Faces he had known for years looked at him, but their warmth did not reach him. Their smiles, their laughter, their recognition, he could not touch them. He felt hollow, as if some vital part of himself had been left behind in the rhythm he had refused. Sleep no longer came easily. At night, he was haunted by visions he could not shake. The drum came alive in his mind, pounding beneath his ribs, pulsing in every beat of his heart. He dreamed of the festival, the firelight, the shadows, the villagers moving in unison, but in these dreams he could not reach the rhythm. He tried to step into the circle to join the dance, but an invisible barrier held him back. Every attempt ended in failure. Every moment left him more fragmented. He approached the drum shelter, hoping perhaps for reconciliation, for a sign, for mercy. But it remained silent. Dust clung stubbornly to its surface. The crack in its body seemed wider now, deeper, but it offered no comfort, no forgiveness, no acknowledgement. He ran his hands along its worn skin, and the silence pressed back against him, heavy and absolute. Memories of his father flooded him, sharp and unyielding. He remembered the patient hands that had guided him as a child, the warmth of a voice that had never scolded in anger, only taught in presence. He remembered sitting beside the drum, listening to its pulse and feeling safe, loved, connected. And now he understood what he had rejected. The laughter, the mockery, the turning away, they had been more than rebellion. They had been rejection of love itself. He fell to his knees, and the emptiness inside him seemed to stretch further than the village itself. The pride that had once kept him standing now crushed him. He realized that identity was not just what he wanted it to be. It was inherited, shaped, nurtured, and he had turned his back on it. Isolation became his constant companion. Meals were eaten alone, chores completed in silence. Attempts to reach out to others met with polite smiles or avoidance. Even those who had once been his friends did not bridge the space between them. He could feel their lives moving forward, carrying the rhythm he could not touch, while he remained trapped outside it. Dreams grew darker. He awoke to whispers he could not identify, to shadows that moved with intent, to visions of the festival he could not join. The drum haunted him, not in anger but in quiet expectation. It reminded him, relentlessly, of what he had lost. The young man's reflection in the river startled him one morning. The face staring back was pale, hollowed by fear and regret, eyes wide with the weight of understanding. Pride and arrogance had been stripped away, leaving only raw self-awareness, raw grief, raw shame. He could no longer pretend. The laughter that had once freed him now suffocated him in memory. The realization settled in him like a stone. He had rejected not just tradition, not just expectation but connection itself. He had rejected the rhythm that had sustained his family, his village, and the pulse of his own soul. And yet, the drum remained silent. It did not chastise him. It did not punish him. It simply waited, steady, unmoving, its presence a reminder of responsibility he had neglected. He was alone. The village thrived. The festival's echoes still carried in the hearts of the people, their hands still moving in memory and reverence, their souls renewed. And he remained hollow, untethered, fractured by the truth that he could not undo the past. He understood now that collapse was not just an event, it was a state. It was the erosion of pride, the stripping of illusion, the quiet devastation of realizing that one's choices have consequences that cannot be erased. He walked through the village like a ghost, carrying the weight of absence, regret, and the knowledge that laughter, once light and sharp, could leave wounds that time alone could not heal. Even in his isolation, he sensed the drum, patient and enduring, calling quietly for what could no longer be taken lightly. The collapse of the self was complete. Pride had been stripped away. The emptiness had settled in. And yet, within the void, the first faint stirrings of something else, a possibility, a seed of awareness, began to root, unnoticed but persistent, beneath the surface of grief and shame. The young man left his home at first light, carrying only the weight of his mistakes and the memory of the drum. The village awoke around him, alive with chores, laughter, and the hum of daily life, but he felt invisible, as if the world itself had taken note of his absence and chosen not to call him back. Each step he took away from the familiar paths was heavy with shame, yet beneath it stirred the faintest glimmer of something unfamiliar, purpose. He sought the elders first. They sat quietly, observing him without judgment. Their eyes held no scorn, only recognition of the path he must walk. They offered no instructions, no words of comfort. Only the knowledge that redemption was earned, not given, and that effort, humility, and sacrifice were the gateways back to what he had abandoned. They sent him to the hills, to the streams, to the ancient stones that marked the village's boundaries. Each place carried the memory of ancestors, of hands that had tended the land, of lives that had struggled and persevered. He was told simply to witness, to listen, and to understand, not with words but with heart. The journey was harsh. Sun scorched his skin. Streams were shallow and bitter. Nights were cold and endless. He stumbled across jagged stones, waded through mud, and endured the loneliness of being utterly removed from the rhythm of the village. Yet with every hardship, a subtle understanding took root. He learned that the drum's legacy was not punishment, it was responsibility. It demanded presence, care, and willingness to meet the past even when it hurt. In the quiet of the nights, he would lie beneath the stars listening. The faintest whisper of wind sounded like a pulse, the creak of trees like the low hum of the drum. Slowly he began to feel a connection again, not to pride, not to laughter, not to rebellion, but to memory, to love, to the pulse of lives that had come before him. He realized that the ancestors did not need him to kneel, nor did they require him to prove himself with spectacle. They asked only for acknowledgement, effort, and the courage to meet his own failings. The drum remained broken. Its surface was scarred, its cracks wide and deep. He tried to lift it, touch it, feel it respond, but it gave nothing easily. Restoration was not instant. Repair required patience, attention, and sacrifice. He learned to care for it slowly, cleaning it, shaping it, speaking to it quietly in the spaces between day and night. Every act felt small, but every act mattered. Every touch was an admission that he had once failed, and a step toward reconciliation. Days passed into weeks. His journey took him further from comfort, further from pride, and deeper into reflection. He confronted his own fears. Fear of being unworthy, fear of never being forgiven, fear of what it meant to have turned away from life and family. Each fear was met with effort. A hill climbed, a stream crossed, a night spent awake listening to the wind. Each action reminded him that redemption was not a gift, but a labor of the soul. And then one night he returned to the village, not to join the festival, not yet, but to stand near the drum. He touched its surface, cleaned the dust from it, and felt its weight in his hands. It did not answer immediately. It did not move or hum. But in its stillness he felt something deeper, recognition. The drum had not forgotten him. It had waited patiently for him to come of his own accord, to surrender pride, and to accept responsibility. He did not yet feel joy. He did not yet feel relief. He felt something more profound, the first tremor of humility, the slow stirring of understanding, the acknowledgement that he could begin to repair what he had broken, not with words, not with ceremony, but with heart and effort. He knelt beneath the stars that night, alone, listening. The wind carried faint echoes of the drum's rhythm from the festival's memory, distant yet familiar. The ancestors were near, not judging, not dancing, not punishing. They were waiting, patient as they always had been. And the young man finally understood that effort, sacrifice, and humility were the bridge back from absence to belonging. The path of atonement had begun. The young man returned to the village at dawn, his steps slower now, measured, aware of every shadow and every whisper of wind. The paths he had once taken with arrogance now felt unfamiliar, as if he were seeing the village for the first time. The houses, the trees, the fields, all carried memory, all carried the pulse of life that had gone on while he was absent. He walked past neighbors and elders who nodded quietly, their eyes soft but observant. No words were needed. They recognized the change in him, subtle yet undeniable. At the shelter the old drum waited. Dust had settled into its cracks, scars deepened with age, yet it remained unbroken in spirit. The young man knelt before it, hands trembling, not with fear but with reverence and humility. He touched the skin gently, brushed away lingering debris, and whispered apologies to the silent instrument, to the ancestors, and to the memory of his father. For a long moment nothing responded. The drum remained still, its surface cracked, its voice muted. He felt a pang of doubt, a fleeting fear that perhaps he had waited too long. But beneath that uncertainty, something subtle began to stir, a faint vibration under his fingers, so soft he might have imagined it. It pulsed again, slightly stronger, and then once more. Not with the celebration of a festival, not with the fury of judgment, but with quiet acknowledgement. The ancestors did not dance for him. The village did not leap into rapture at his return. There were no cheers, no grand rituals, no sudden forgiveness. What existed was far deeper, recognition. The drum remembered him as it had always remembered his family. The rhythm he had once mocked now spoke in whispers, carrying understanding, patience, and the promise that belonging was earned, not demanded. Villagers watched from a distance, some with curiosity, some with hope. They saw the young man kneeling, still flawed, still marked by absence, but no longer defiant. They understood that redemption was not a moment, but a journey. It did not erase the past, nor did it pretend the hurt had never existed. but it offered a path forward, one grounded in care, effort, and acknowledgement. The young man rose slowly, feeling the weight of the drum, the ancestors, and his own history settle within him. For the first time he breathed without tension, without pride pushing against his chest. He was not triumphant. He was not unbroken. He was grounded. And in that grounding there was power. He touched the drum one last time before stepping back. Its faint pulse lingered under his hand, steady, enduring, patient. The rhythm was not loud. It did not command the world. But it carried forward, quietly, across generations yet to come. It carried the weight of memory, of responsibility, of love. It carried the reminder that tradition survives not in blind obedience, but in understanding and care. The young man looked across the village. The smoke of morning fires rose gently. Children laughed in the distance, elders moved quietly among the fields, and the hills stretched, timeless and unwavering. He understood at last that the past does not vanish. It waits, remembers, and if he chose, he could carry it forward with honor. The drum's rhythm continued, not loud, not triumphant, not commanding, but enduring. Steady as breath, patient as life, and alive in a way that would never be forgotten. The young man smiled faintly, a smile without arrogance, without mockery, without pride. It was the smile of one who had come home, not to celebration, but to understanding. And in the quiet of the village, with the drum's subtle pulse beneath the morning sun, that understanding was enough.